Good morning. I am Dr. Sridhar Kalyanasundaram. I am a consultant neonatologist. I am the head of the department at Zuleika Hospital in Dubai. Today we will be having an overview on infant feeding and nutrition, and we'll be focusing on certain very important points. So the main objectives of the presentation, we have to look at the main benefits of breastfeeding and the measures to promote breastfeeding. We will discuss the approach to choice of special infant formula and situations to consider their use. Even though most of the formulas I mentioned will be relevant to the UAE setup, I'm sure the same principles apply to infant formula all over the world. We'll also have an overview of nutritional supplements in infants. We will review some situations where we may face difficulty with establishing feeding. And finally, we will look at infant complementary feeding. In other words, we call that infant weaning, and current updates on the same. So all of us are familiar with the World Health Organization recommendation that we should be using exclusive breastfeeding for the first 6 months. And thereafter, we have to start complementary feeds, but continue the breastfeeding as well till 2 years of age and even beyond. The benefits of breastfeeding need not be told to any of you, but to reiterate the points, there are benefits both for the infants as well as for the mothers. For the infant, obviously starting from colostrum, which is also called as liquid gold, it has antibodies, it greatly reduces infection risk. The breast milk is fine-tuned to the baby's requirements all through the stages of feeding. It promotes healthy weight gain. There's a reduced risk of obesity. And it is ideal nutrition. Whatever said and done, however many research parameters are applied to infant formula, it can never match breast milk, and that's the truth. It also has been shown to have advantage to brain development, and this advantage is sustained till the first few months at least. The long-term studies have not shown a persistent advantage, but I'm sure that there will be studies coming up in the future. There's also a lower risk of obesity and chronic diseases like hypertension and diabetes when you exclusively breastfeed. In addition, there are advantages to the mother. It helps to lose weight. There is faster involution of the uterus in the immediate postpartum period. There's a lower risk of postpartum depression. It reduces the risk of breast and ovarian cancer. It pauses ovulation and serves as a natural contraception. And above all, it's economical. And this economy part, as well as the safety part, where it doesn't involve any bottle feeding, is a big advantage in reducing infections in the developing countries. The WHO as well as various bodies, including the UNICEF, have evaluated many countries. Only 23 of 194 countries have an exclusive breastfeeding rate above 60% to start with. And only 34% of mothers in the UAE exclusively breastfeed in the first 6 months. It's even lower in other affluent populations. There is a big government support for baby-friendly hospital initiative, and especially in the Emirate of Sharjah, it's mandatory to have baby-friendly certification. Other Emirates are following the same instruction as well. All of us are familiar with the baby-friendly hospital initiative steps, which were updated in 2018. I'm not going to go through each step, but suffice it to say that it's very important for any hospital which delivers babies to be at least following the principles of baby-friendly hospital initiative. The role of breast milk expression can be considered both from preterm babies' point of view as well as in babies where the feeding establishing is taking time. So there are many measures to support lactation. This includes teaching mothers to express milk by hand initially and then by pump. As I said, it's very important for the premature babies who may be in the NICU. The mothers have to start expressing, if possible, before delivery or at least soon after delivery. Starting within the first hour after birth is shown to increase the output. The primigravida mothers, the working mothers, and those who have previous breastfeeding difficulty should actively be encouraged to express milk by day 1 to day 4. This reduces the risk of lactation failure. Expressing milk ensures adequate stimulation and emptying. Remember that establishing breastfeeding involves milk production as well as transfer, and failure of lactation can happen from either of these steps. If the milk production is slow to start with for whatever reason, the baby doesn't get milk, the baby is discouraged from sucking effectively. However, if the mother is producing milk but the baby is not able to transfer the milk, there will be the milk retained in the breast. This leads to a substance which inhibits further lactogenesis, and so milk production reduces or stops. So it's very important that in addition to supporting the lactation by looking at the latch and supporting the mother during feeding, it's also important to ensure that in especially the target groups above, we need to support the mother to express milk as well. This uh, stimulates the production further and also ensures the emptying so the milk production continues. It also may brings the parent attention that feeding is something that's not always natural and it needs support. There are many studies which have been done in the developed countries where breastfeeding difficulties are about 35 to 40% of the mothers, while in natural settings in rural Ghana and other countries, it's about 4 to 5%. So this goes to show that what we consider as natural doesn't happen as a fully natural process, and we need to support as best as we can in the developed world especially. So these are different types of pumps that are available. We have the manual ones and the electric ones. While using the pumps, the parent should be advised to sterilize the bottles and the equipment properly, because there can be a source of infection as well. What are the conditions which necessitate formula feeds? We may need formula feed as a supplement where the breastfeeding is done but it is not effective. It can be in situations like neonatal hypoglycemia, where there is excess weight loss, jaundice, and in very preterm babies. There may be some conditions which need special infant formula. Some parents choose to formula feed exclusively as a choice, and this might be partial or complete formula feeding. This might be because of various reasons. Social factors are the main things where the mother may need to go to work. Remember this picture where the camel is entering into the tent. It's initially asking just to get into the tent with his head, but then gradually it goes all the way in and actually the owner is pushed out of the tent. And this is just an illustration of how formula feeding may actually start with a small supplement, but unless the parents are really motivated and they understand that reducing the breastfeeding and increasing the formula will eventually lead to full formula feeding, this outcome is inevitable. So whenever we explain that some formula supplement is needed, we should be clear that it's only a short period of time that you're going to supplement, or even if you're supplementing on a regular basis, never compromise on the breastfeeding part. In terms of important steps to ensure safe formula feeding, when we start with formula top-ups for a brief duration, like in hypoglycemia or in the growth restricted babies, as far as possible, try to avoid the teats, try to avoid bottle feeding. This is because nipple confusion may happen and the baby doesn't feed as well, and so the mother may be discouraged to continue breastfeeding. It's also important to teach the parents proper sterilization techniques with the feeding bottle if they are using one. It's also important to instruct them that the formula feeds have to be reconstituted in boiled water at 70 degrees centigrade. So this will reach about 15 minutes after we stop boiling. Once the powder is mixed, then we let it stand to a suitable temperature to feed, and all of you may be familiar with testing it on the dorsum of your hand. There are different types of infant formulae. The most commonly used is a stage 1 milk, and most of them currently are predominantly whey based. There's 60% whey and 40%. The protein content of the formula is 1.3 to 1.4 grams per 100 ml. Vitamin and iron supplementation in the formula as well, and various other components are added: the long chain polyunsaturated fatty acids, arachidonic acid, DHA supplements. Some milks come with probiotics added to them. Majority of them come with prebiotics added, and recently we have the human milk oligosaccharides which have been added to infant formula to try and replicate it similar to the breast milk. The calorie content of the normal milk is 67 calories per 100 ml. This equates to what is there in the human milk. The hungry baby milk is nothing but a milk where the whey casein ratio is reversed. It has 80% casein. So most of the older formulas about 15 years or so back had this composition. It forms a thicker curd, which delays the stomach emptying, and so possibly the baby is less hungry. But remember that the protein is less ideal than the human milk, because human milk is whey predominant. And the reason the whey became more in the formulas, despite it being more expensive to manufacture, is to make it as close to breast milk as possible. So if you are going for the hungry baby milk, you should remember that you're actually choosing an inferior product. The stage 2 milk is generally recommended after 6 months of age. However, please remember that it has casein predominance, as the baby can tolerate other products well. Usually weaning has started by this time as well. There's a higher sugar content, and remember that lactose is a more difficult sugar to produce than sucrose, because lactose has to be separated from milk, and sucrose is readily available. So the stage 2 milks are having sucrose as a significant component as well, which is not ideal for the developing teeth. So obviously we should keep in mind that the stage 2 milk is for a baby who has weaned reasonably well. So the milk is not the predominant diet at this stage, and it can be continued. The stage 1 milk can be even continued till 1 year of age if you want to keep the advantages. The special infant formulae are available as well. Comfort milks typically have partially hydrolyzed protein, and they have a lower lactose levels. It's aimed at reducing colic or constipation. However, there is no clear evidence that they help, though it's quite commonly used in the community in babies with significant colic. The hypoallergenic milks are similar to the above, except that they're partially hydrolyzed with more control. They're exclusively whey-based or casein-based, and there is some reduction in lactose as well. There's no clear evidence that the hypoallergenic milks or the partially hydrolyzed milks reduce allergy, so it should not be used for treatment of milk allergy or intolerance. There have been some studies which have looked at using the partially hydrolyzed milks to start with in families with a definite history of atopic dermatitis or other allergies. However, the evidence is equivocal. In terms of constipation, for example, you may have an altered formulation of fatty acid the position, calcium content, as well as added magnesium to make it a laxative. There are anti-reflux milks which use thickeners like cornstarch or carob gum. This needs to be prepared in lukewarm water to avoid thickening before feeding, and we may also need a larger teat size, as this sometimes doesn't flow well through the normal size teat. Most of them are formulated to thicken in the stomach, but if it lets to stand for a few minutes, it may thicken outside as well. These special formulae are to be used for a period of time, and as soon as the baby starts improving, you can make the switch in a phased manner, like 1/3 of the feeds to start with normal milk, and then 2/3, and then replace fully. Lactose-free or anti-diarrheal milks are short-term support post-gastroenteritis, because sometimes after gastroenteritis episode, the lactase enzyme in the gut epithelial cells is low. So they may have persisting loose stools due to the lactose intolerance. This is for a period of a couple of weeks or so. So when you make the transition, again, change back when the stools normalize. In terms of cow's milk protein intolerance, this is a diagnosis by itself. It's not uncommon. We should consider if there is persisting excess crying, especially if there is blood staining or streaking of the stools with mucus as well in the stools. Failure to thrive is a late presentation. Many of these babies may have gastroesophageal reflux symptoms and persistent irritability as a feature as well. The first step is to have a trial of cow's milk elimination in the mother's diet if exclusively breastfed. If the baby needs formula in addition to the breastfeeding, then we can consider special infant formula. So this is an illustration of the standard cow's milk protein, where the chains are complete. Partially hydrolyzed is about 60% hydrolyzed. It breaks it at certain points, but still it's predominantly peptide chains. The extensively hydrolyzed formula have small peptides, 94 to 96% hydrolyzed depending on the brand, and the level of breaking differs. So if you don't respond to one partially hydrolyzed milk, you may respond to another one. However, the predominant choice if you fail with one partially extensively hydrolyzed milk is to go for amino acid formula, where basically there are no peptide chains It's only the free amino acids. Both extensively hydrolyzed milks and the amino acid formula are expensive. The amino acid formula are significantly more expensive. They are safe to continue on a long-term basis, but obviously milk protein intolerance may be outgrown with time. So to have the cost benefit, you may try to change it. So hydrolyzed rice-based formula have been tried as well. Studies have shown a similar response to above, but we should be careful about the arsenic content. The manufacturing quality control should include the arsenic content to be in the normal range, because rice is the source of arsenic. Amino acid formulae also with more MCT and lactose free as well. So the point to mention to the parents when you start such formulae, one is the expense. The other one is that they shouldn't be exposed to any other milk products. If the mother is breastfeeding, in addition, she should be removing all milk products. So milk, cheese, yogurt, ghee, butter, any of these should not be in the mother's milk. And it's normal to have gray or slate colored pasty stools when they use with above milks. So it can happen with the comfort formula as well to an extent. So inform the parents so they're not alarmed on looking at this stool. We have some babies with carbohydrate intolerance, which can be transient, as we discussed with diarrhea, or it can be due to other reasons like galactosemia. So they cannot metabolize galactose. The lactose and galactose-free diet should be recommended. We normally use a soy-based formula like Isomil. The sugar is fully lactose-free in these cases. Mostly it's cornstarch-based. The normal lactose-free milks are not licensed for use in galactosemia, mainly because the source of the protein is also from the cow's milk, and during the separation process, a degree of lactose is retained in the proteins. So please remember that lactose-free milks are not ideal. Lactose intolerance is another condition where there's inability of the small intestine to produce enzyme lactase. Majority of the time, it's a secondary lactose intolerance, but it can be primary, and it may be a mild form where reducing the content may be enough. The soy-based formula, low lactose or lactose-free formula can be used. Some babies present with frothing, explosive loose stools with severe nappy rash. Remember that zinc supplementation may be needed in some of these babies to help with the nappy rash, in addition to the low lactose formula. There are also special formulas for certain conditions like maple syrup urine disease, where we should use a formula free of leucine, isoleucine, and valine. In phenylketonuria, you use phenylalanine-free formula. In conditions with lymphatic dysfunction, like a chylous fistula or chylothorax, milk high in medium chain triglycerides are needed, like Monogen. There are special formulae like Alcylo XD, which can be used in hypercalcemic conditions like Williams syndrome or primary hyperparathyroidism. In chronic renal failure, we may have low renal solute load, low potassium, calcium, phosphate, and chloride. And examples of these are Kindregen and Renastat. Other conditions like poor weight gain and high energy milk can be used in these situations. Where we have short gut syndrome, extensively hydrolyzed formula may help because there is less stress on the gut for absorption. In preterm babies in the hospital, we use preterm formula. The difference between the preterm formula and the term formula is the calorie content. So the preterm formula has about 80 kilocalories per 100 ml. The protein content is higher as well. There is 2 gram protein every 100 ml. There's more calcium, phosphorus, sodium, and other supplements as well. So it's meant to meet the requirements for the preterm babies when they are reaching about 150 to 160 ml per kilo per day. The post-discharge milk is a special formula which is meant for preterm babies to be used at discharge. They have composition in between that of the preterm formula and the term formula. The calorie content is about 74 kilocalories per 100 ml. The protein content is 1.6 to 1.7 grams per 100 ml. And they also have a higher level of calcium, phosphorus, and iron vitamin supplements. These can be used after discharge in the preterm babies till 3 to 6 months. depending on the weight gain. I usually stop it when we reach a weight of 4 to 6 kilograms. In terms of dietary supplements, vitamin K is given at birth because breast milk is low on vitamin K. And if you can't give the injection vitamin K due to any reason like suspected hemophilia or parental refusal, we may consider oral vitamin K. We give a higher dose of oral vitamin K, 2 milligram on the first day 7 and day 28. The same injection can be used as oral preparation as well. Vitamin D drops is advised at 400 units per day in both breastfed and formula-fed babies. There is a brief period when the formula-fed babies are taking around 1 liter of milk before the weaning starts, when you may not need the supplement in theory, but because it's cumbersome to apply in practice, it's better to use the same recommendation for both breast and formula-fed babies. After 4 months, consider multivitamin with adequate vitamin D, and trace elements may be added as well. Iron supplement should be considered at 1 to 2 milligram per kilogram per day of iron, especially in breastfed babies. When introducing complementary foods, consider iron fortified or iron rich food, and consider above at least 1 year of age until 2 years preferably. In preterm babies, human milk fortifier is used with express breast milk in all babies less than 1,500 gram till they cross 2 kilos or till they are fully on suck feeds. Sometimes we continue even after discharge for a period of time. In babies who are more than 1,500 gram with a slower weight gain, we can start the fortifier either at full strength, where we add a sachet for every 25 ml of the milk, or at half strength, which is 1 sachet for every 50 ml of milk. The bigger babies may be tolerating half strength and they may still gain weight well. Vitamin D drop should be continued for the preterm babies as well, and these babies need a higher iron supplement of 2 to 4 milligram per kilogram per day after 3 weeks of age. This is usually started for all babies under 34 weeks. We also need a higher dose of iron supplement in babies where there is evidence of hemolytic jaundice. The fluoride supplementation is also a recommendation in both term and preterm babies, especially before teething. And remember that the low fluoride toothpastes that the babies follow gives with some fluoride in them as well. So coming on to problems related to feeding. So the first step is obviously establishing lactation, and adequate lactation support is essential from the antenatal period, and especially in the first 2 to 3 days post-delivery. A weight review on day 2 as well as prior to discharge should be done in all units to pick up the babies with excess weight loss. Daily weight loss of about 4% on the first day, 3% on the second day, and 2% for each subsequent day is usually expected in exclusive breastfeeding babies. This is not as prominent in the growth restricted babies because their free water content is less. It also is less prominent if they have needed formula top up for any reason. The weight usually starts stabilizing by day 4 to 5. That is the stage when the lactogenesis enters stage 2. If there is a greater than 10% weight loss from the birth weight at any stage, it's an indication of concern, and more than 12% is definitely significant. When we reach a 10% stage, we should ensure that the mother is producing milk, and in most instances, this would mean reviewing the latch with the lactation consultant, showing the mother how to express milk and assess the volume of output, closely monitor the weight and the urine output. If the weight gain is poor even after 1 day of this monitoring, we may consider some formula supplement, especially if there is not much milk while expressing. There is also a significantly increased risk of jaundice and hypernatremia with excess weight loss, and there is a risk of neurologic injury due to both of these. So we shouldn't take establishing feeding and feeding support lightly. It's very important to make sure that feeding is established well. As I said, if there is more than 4% weight loss, we should review and support the feeding and review closely to monitor latch as well as breast milk output. We should consider using a breast pump. Where the working mother is involved, we should get an electric pump early on because they are likely to need the breast pump when they go to work as well. So the investment is worth it. Monitor the infant urine output as well as the sleep pattern. We should consider serum sodium in addition to the bilirubin if weight loss is exceeding 10 to 12% so that we can pick up hypernatremia. Not every baby with dehydration reaches hypernatremia because some mothers have relatively low sodium in the breast milk. However, even with the lower percentage of weight loss, hypernatremia may happen, in which case your rehydration has to be controlled. Another problem which can lead to lactation difficulty is tongue tie. So this has been highlighted more in the last 10 to 15 years with increase in lactation support available, and understanding that a significant tongue tie can cause significant pain during lactation as well as inefficient milk transfer, which can lead to lactation failure. So this is quite a significant tongue tie where the tongue is tethered down to the base with a tight tongue tie. If it is a mild tongue tie, we can leave it alone. We need to support latching. If it is an experienced mother, most of them manage to breastfeed even with the tongue tie, but if it's a primigravida mother, they tend to be affected more. A frenulotomy can be done if a clear membrane that can be divided. It's a simple procedure. As it doesn't have blood supply or nerves, we don't need any local anesthesia. A frenulectomy using a laser or surgical procedure can be done in a fibrotic band under the tongue or a deep posterior tie. These should be done by people experienced in the field. Cleft lip and palate also lead to problems with feeding establishment. The cleft lip makes it difficult to suck. Special nipples can be used that allow latch properly, and in case of cleft palate, there may be prominent regurgitation through the nose as well. So we should teach the mother upright position while feeding. In terms of failure to thrive and speech delay can lead to articulation problems as well. So a Haberman feeder is a useful tool in terms of cleft lip and palate. I would recommend that you go through special instructions on how to use this, as it has 3 settings which you need to understand. We need to teach the parents how to use it as well. An obturator can be used as well if the dentist is available who can produce one of those. So I'm not going into detail on how to use the Haberman teat. I'm sure you can get tutorials on that online. So what do we do to assess growth during infancy? We normally expect a weight gain of 30 grams per day from 0 to 3 months of age, and it drops to 15 grams per day from 3 to 6 months of age, and 10 grams per day from 6 to 12 months. However, it's not enough to tell the parents that this is a pattern of weight gain. It's important to stress to them that the growth in an individual baby depends on the growth centile as well as the family pattern. So there are apps available like the Growth app where the parents can choose to plot the weight on the WHO growth charts, which are meant for exclusively breastfed babies. These charts are ideal in the first 2 years of age, after which the CDC charts can be used. The breastfeeding pattern is typically 2 to 3 hourly. Some babies may cluster feed, which means they feed repeatedly an hour or so, but then they sleep for longer intervals. If a baby is persistently cranky and keeps feeding, it might indicate that the mother needs lactation support. This is especially if the weight gain is not good as well. A breastfeeding baby typically feeds 8 to 12 times a day. Formula feeding is more controlled, and 3 to 4 hourly feeds, 6 to 8 feeds in 24 hours. And the volume you expect is about 140 to 200 ml per kilo per day. It's again important to point out to the parents that the formula tins, they recommend limits which are on the higher side. So reaching a volume of 200 to 220 ml by 6 months of age is quite fast for most of the smallish babies we get in South Asian culture. Most of these babies, you can expect to increase 30 ml per feed. You can start with 60 to 90 ml for a full-term baby of around 3 kilos, and then you increase it as the baby tolerates. Go by the growth chart as well. Avoid overfeeding and avoid following the instruction on the tin just for the sake of following the instructions. It's better to go by the growth assessment and the hunger of the baby. So roughly 30 ml every month or every 6 weeks is a reasonable pattern, but if the baby keeps refusing the higher volume, don't push the baby to take more. This may be an indication that the baby has a lower growth potential and we shouldn't push more than what is needed. Pushing more may lead to reflux and other problems. As the baby gets older, the feeding frequency is reduced as we progress with complementary feeding. Around 1 year, breastfeed as often as a baby needs. If the baby is formula feeding, we don't need more than 480 to 600 ml per day. And many babies may do with just 2 formula feeds a day in addition to the complementary foods. Complementary feeding is nothing but weaning when we introduce non-milk foods in the diet. The World Health Organization recommends 6 months of exclusive breastfeeding. So you start weaning by 6 months of age in most of the situations. The ESPGHAN has suggested not before completing 4 months, but not later than 6 months. This is because the baby may start refusing if you leave it too late. We can consider introducing after 4 months if the infant shows signs of readiness, but we can start in small quantities in addition to the full breastfeeds. So you discuss this with the family. Many parents have their own views on when to start it. So this advice of 4 to 6 months range, depending on when the baby is ready, and going in a slow manner is a reasonable advice. This is more applicable in the developed countries. In the developing countries, we have to weigh the disadvantages of contamination of food, risk of infections being introduced, and so on as well. And remember that cost-wise, breast milk is the cheapest, and so continuing exclusively breastfeeding till 6 months is going to be cost-effective as well. If you're starting prior to 4 months, the baby is not ready, both from the swallowing point of view as well as a gut readiness point of view. We have a higher chance of allergy as well as a higher risk of obesity in formula-fed babies. So before 4 months is a no-no. If you're starting after 6 months, there is a risk of iron and zinc deficiency, and the baby may get more fussy, and there's a risk of rejection as well. When we assess readiness, we have to look at the head control, and the baby should be able to sit with support. We don't need to be sitting without support. Sitting on a high chair where the front is supported and the baby can lean back with a cushion is a good idea. There should be shorter intervals between the feeding. The baby is hungrier and is looking for more food. The baby should open the mouth when presented with food, which indicates an interest in feeding. The baby is looking at the parents and very keen to eat as well. So if the baby demonstrates cues that they finished feeding, such as turning the head away from the breast or bottle when they are done, they are more ready to take solids as well. What to introduce depends a lot on cultural factors. First, offer a variety of single ingredient fruits, vegetables, grains, and meat in any order to allow for the baby to get accustomed. We don't recommend anything sweet. Honey should not be used at all in the first year of life because of the risk of infant botulism. There should not be any sweetened beverages introduced. Juices are not essential, and juices are nothing but fruit sugar. They are not good for the developing teeth, and they don't have any fiber or protein content unless they are with the pulp as well. So if you are giving juices with pulp, it's fine. If not, give fresh fruits directly. Some juices can be used where there is constipation, like apple juice or prune juice, for a brief period of time, but clean the gum area when you give anything sweet. Parents have to be clearly told that sugar means anything sweet, no jaggery, no brown sugar, no sweeteners. Avoid excess of rice-based weaning. Give a mix of oats, wheat, and other grains. This is mainly because of the arsenic load in the rice. Avoid excess gluten load. Introduce wheat after 6 months and in a reduced quantity if possible to avoid gluten sensitization. In terms of introducing allergenic foods, with current evidence, there is no benefit that introducing in a delayed fashion of the allergenic foods has any help. It can be introduced in culturally appropriate fashion any time after 4 to 6 months after non-allergenic foods are tolerated. The LEAP study, which was published recently, showed that infants at high risk of allergy, introducing peanuts in an age-appropriate form like paste between 4 and 6 months showed a lower risk of allergy developing. It's about a 25% reduction in the risk of allergy in these babies compared to controls. Evidence similar to the above for other potentially allergenic food like egg, fish as well. Introduce eggs in a cooked form, and remember that there is a risk of salmonella infection from uncooked egg, even if partially uncooked. and introduce fish one species at a time. And if there is other seafoods as well, you have to be careful when you introduce them. Food protein-induced proctocolitis presents with blood spotting in the stools, irritability in usually thriving infants. This could be related to cow's milk protein or egg protein in most instances. Elimination trial for at least 2 weeks helps to resolve it, in which case we have to assume that it's a diagnosis in the baby and we have to manage appropriately. Food avoidance for a period of 4 to 6 months and then reintroduce in a gradual phased manner as tolerated. Food protein-induced enterocolitis syndrome is more dramatic. There is a sudden onset of acute vomiting and diarrhea. It's usually non-IgE mediated. It can be severe and the child can be pale, mottled, and may need IV rehydration. It can be triggered after introduction of new foods, which may be cow's milk, soya, rice, oat, other grains, egg, vegetables, poultry, and fish. So a careful dietary history is important, especially if the child presents with acute gastroenteritis-like presentation, but there is no sign of infection. So to summarize, breastfeeding is a best feed, and the time spent in promoting and supporting breastfeeding is well worth the effort. There are situations necessitating formula feed, and pediatricians should be well versed with safe formula feeding advice. We should also be aware of special formulas available to advise the parents. Another question that may come up here is the use of alternative milks like goat's milk or camel's milk. Remember that no non-formula milk form is recommended under 1 year of age. Most of the animal milks are too strong for the gut, as well as the renal solute load is very high. Camel milk has been used in some communities, but there is no camel milk based formula, so you shouldn't use it before 1 year of age. Goat's milk based infant formula are available, and it's practically the same as cow's milk based formula in all ways. It's just a matter of choice. But these formula may be more expensive. Difficult feeding necessitates review by a feeding expert. Speech therapist may be needed, and in terms of cleft palate support, a maxillofacial dental surgeon as well as a full cleft palate team would be needed to handle and improve feeding. Complementary feeding is an essential part of infant feeding, and pediatricians should update themselves on current recommendation. In addition to all this, we should remember that holistic care is very important, and we should be teaching the parents recognition of delayed milestones. We should teach them accident prevention. We should teach them dental hygiene from the early stages. So to come off the bottle feed as far as we can, oral hygiene soon after giving foods to prevent caries developing. So all these are important parts of supporting the family in nutrition as well. So thank you for listening, and I think the organizers may be able to share some post-test questions, which I'm sure you'll have no difficulty answering after you have attended this talk. Thank you for your opportunity, for the patient listening. Thank you.